but it's better for you to look at the camera.
Yeah.
It looks better.
Jeg vil helst at vi skal se på kamera. Det har jo der. Så.
And you want to you want him to be kind of framed right here.
Oh, that's it. What
You
now?
want his head to be, if you could get his head in the frame. Yes. Yes.
It's also, kan du ligge litt?
What's happening now?
Ligge bak. Jeg skal bare flytte. I just want you, is it better if I change the light?
Yes.
Jeg bare vent.
Oh, yes.
Hvor ble det den? Sorry, I have some spaghetti here.
No, it's great.
Kan du løfte vekk telefonen din?
Oh, I love it. Great.
Sånn jeg gjør det, jeg skal ha sånn. There we are.
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Perfect.
No. Okay.
That's what we like. You even have a bookshelf that establishes his legitimacy.
Okay. Do you need me to adjust the sound or something?
You sound perfect. The only thing I would say is if you could close the door.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ellen.
Have fun.
Thank you. Dr. Waal, thank you so much for taking the time.
Okay.
If it's okay, I'd like to record this.
That's okay. That's okay. Yes.
Thank you very much. So you are the lead author of this very interesting paper called Open Drug Scenes, Responses of 5 European Cities.
Yes, that's right.
And before we get into the paper, can you tell me a little bit about yourself? Who are you? What is your background and why were you qualified to do this study?
Well, I'm a psychiatrist specialized in addiction medicine. And I started my work in at that time, Norwegian State Clinic for Addicts in 1968. And since then, I've been more or less working within the field. And presently, I have been a professor of psychiatry and addiction medicine in University of Oslo. Of course, now in my age, I'm retired, more or less. So, but I undertook this work because it was sort of a nuisance and a problem in Oslo, in spite of building developing a treatment system. Still, we had a problem of open drug scene, and the authorities had tried to move it by police force, which of course just resulted in new scenes, and they tried to establish different types of helping systems on the scenes, which again didn't help. So we decided to study cities that seemed to have done this better than us. So I got a grant and I had a sort of study of 5 cities.
It's fair to say that you're pretty well known in the psychiatry community in Finland, in Norway.
Mostly in Norway, yes, absolutely.
And your mother was also a very important psychiatrist in Norway.
Oh, she was she was more or less the founder of Norwegian child psychiatry. So,
I read that.
Yeah.
I read that she helped Jews escape Germany during World War II and during the Holocaust.
Oh, that's right. She was participating in the resistance movement, and one of the things she did was to assist in the escape of the Norwegian the Jewish children's home to Sweden. That's right.
Well, tell me. So you mentioned that Oslo had a open-air drug scene, and it was struggling to deal with it. And so the government decided to do a study of how other European cities had dealt with open-air drug scenes. Is that right?
Well, it was the city of Oslo actually, but that's not important.
And what year was it that the city of Oslo decided to commission the study?
This study was performed in 2011. It was decided 1 or 2 years before.
And can you tell me a little bit about what the method was? What did you do to conduct the study?
Well, it was a three-stage study. First, we gathered information on the scenes in these 5 different cities, and we also gathered information on what they had tried to do, what they had written about it, and what seemed to be successful and not so successful, and the happenings in the city. And secondly, we I made up a sort of profile of the study of these cities, and we had a study group of consisting of police, the Oslo police, ministry representative, and a representative from the Oslo treatment system, and myself. And we went to each of these cities and presented our profile, and also discussed with them what seemed to be important and what did not seem to be so important. And back in Oslo, I wrote this to a report, and this report was sent to each of the cities so that they could sort of correct or react to my understanding. So the final report is built upon the first of the literature study, the visit on the in the cities, and the city's response of my report on my understanding of their undertakings. So yeah.
So before you made your conclusions about how these different cities handled it, representatives from these cities reviewed your own findings and responded to them.
Yeah, that's right.
Can you say, so you're an expert in psychiatry and addiction. It also sounds like you had a long history in helping heroin and substance abusers transition to methadone, and you were a pioneer of methadone. Is that also the case?
That's the case. I was sort of central to the building of the Norwegian methadone system, which was quite resisted by the authorities at that time.
And that was starting, is that the 1970s?
The methadone program we had a trial period from 1940 to 1997. So it was a trial period to have them accept the results. And this trial period was built so that we selected those addicts in Oslo that seemed most hopeless, that had been tried to treat in different ways unsuccessfully several times. So they all had they was at least 30 years old. They had at least 10 years of addiction, and at least four attempts for other types of treatment without success. And we felt that if we could demonstrate that these addicts profited by methadone treatment, this would be proof enough for Norway to build a Norwegian system. And so from 1998 up to now, there is a national treatment system built upon this model where the GPs cooperate with the social services in each municipality. That again cooperates with the specialist hospital system, and each hospital have one methadone unit. So there is a system that covers the whole of Norway. Yeah.
And so you had a successful methadone program up and running already in Norway.
In 1997, yes. From 1997 on, we built it.
But then you get to
that the authorities opposed methadone as being a sort of failure in reaching the goals of the drug-free society.
So you had this methadone program, but then by 2010, 2011, the city of Oslo felt that they had these large open-air drug scenes that were not being solved by methadone.
not by methadone alone, or perhaps this was a high threshold methadone with some sort of demands on them to detoxify and also have different types of other um, undertakings before accepted into the methadone. So sort of high threshold rehabilitation oriented methadone. And there seemed to be a relatively high number of people that did not sort of adapt to this treatment program.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
So the 5 cities that you looked at are Amsterdam, Frankfurt, Vienna, Zurich, and Lisbon.
Yes, that's right.
You write in the results of your paper, you write that all of the cities had initially a period of conflict between liberal and restrictive policies. A political consensus seems to be a prerequisite for effective action.
That was an observation that all these cities had sort of conflicting periods where they alternated between the more liberal or treatment-oriented and helping-oriented and suppression-oriented policies, more or less coincided, so that the conservative political parties supported the repressive approach, while the liberal and radical parties supported the treatment or the helping approach in different ways. And so the one had the upper hand and tried, and they didn't succeed, and so the other party had the upper hand and did not succeed, and so the years passed on until they, by some sort of increasing conflict, reached a consensus. And this consensus seemed to be necessary to be able to establish the necessary programs.
You say a core shared characteristic was that drug dependence was met as a health problem and a drug use behavior as a public nuisance problem. Low threshold health services, including opioid maintenance treatment, were combined with outreach, social work, and effective policing. So your conclusion then was prevention, harm reduction, and treatment should be combined with law enforcement based on cooperation between police, healthcare, and social services. So in some ways, it sounds like what you're saying is that there had been these alternative, liberal, conservative, strict and helping, but that actually what worked was to combine them. Is that a fair description?
That's a fair conclusion, yes. It seems that without this consensus, you did not, the cities were not able to sustain the policies, the necessary policies. Yeah.
So
yeah.
So let's first talk about the definition. You use the words open drug scene. Sometimes I hear we hear these scenes referred to as open air drug markets. Why do you think the term scene is better than the term market? Or is it just
the market sort of indicates it's just the selling and buying. It's not only a marketplace, it's also a place where people meet each other, where they live and they stay. It's a sort of a scene of drug using in life. And it's a sort of built upon the long, well-known tendencies in all modern societies that people with different types of problems, they sort of tend to centrifugate to the city centers, where they sort of sustain their living in one way or another. And when this core population of people with expelled from their own local societies meet with a modern drug problem, it becomes a sort of mix of people having different types of problems, different types of stigmas, different types of living problems, together with increasing addiction and addiction life. So it's a sort of, it's not only a marketplace, it's a place where people live.
You created a table that I thought was super interesting. This is a table where what you did was, it is a list of the interventions that the different cities shared. So you listed, what did the cities all do? And then you said, here's what some cities did that other cities didn't do. And the top five, so you have 5 interventions that all cities held in common: shared political and social consensus,
Mm.
city coordination system,
Yeah,
system for shared information,
yeah,
low
that's right.
threshold opioid maintenance treatment,
Yeah, that's right.
and needle dispensing.
Needle dispensing, I don't think that was core in all the cities, but it was also needle dispensing. Yes, absolutely. Yeah,
But
no,
yes,
not injection sites, but needle dispensing. Yeah.
and it's also fair to say that the involvement of law enforcement was also common. In other words, you say very clearly that no city succeeded without law enforcement. Is that right?
That's right. Without law enforcement, in combination, together with the social services, assertive social services, seem to be necessary. If the law enforcement alone, they didn't have a chance because they just succeed in imprisonments and also making people go away where they went to another place. And there was quite a lot of in Amsterdam, in Zurich, for instance, they created extreme problematic surroundings when they tried to shut the needle park.
Mm-hmm.
So they had to do more than that. So without combining the helping and the repressive measures, you only made things worse or only succeed in moving the problem.
Interesting. So when there's a strategy to break up the open air drug scene, the picture that you paint for the reader of your paper is that so the law enforcement is going in and they're saying you can't congregate here, but that's not the end of the story. They're also saying we can offer you shelter, we can offer you treatment, we can offer you other services. So the law enforcement is involved, but it's not just arresting everybody. It's actually engaging with the people in the scene to get them the help they need. But it's
Yes.
but it's also not just there's some amount of coercion in the sense that it's not totally optional. These cities are saying you can't congregate here.
You can't you can be a nuisance to other people. You have a right to stay in the city and a right to live in the city. You don't have a right to be a nuisance to other people. So we can assist you with different types of living places, different types of housing, different types of treatment systems, but on the other hand, you cannot refuse that and stay on the scenes.
Right. Now, you also make the point that that just arresting people for buying and selling drugs was not a priority.
No,
In other words,
that's correct. It's not a priority. No, it's not stopping the peddling primarily. But of course, it was also some sort of policy that large-scale peddling, large-scale drug selling is an offense and should be an offense. And those who was caught is arrested and imprisoned in all these countries.
one of the things that we hear in the United States is that Lisbon decriminalized and that was the solution. But you're
in Lisbon.
Lisbon. But your story is a little different than that. What you've evaluated is that Lisbon, it didn't just decriminalize. It may have made the arrests of people selling and buying drugs a lower priority, but it still used law enforcement and coercive measures along with the treatment and the outreach measures. Is that right? Is there a better picture of Lisbon that we should have?
I would like to picture Lisbon in its historical connection because it developed from a oppressive state of dictatorship that went bankrupt. And you had large areas of the city with complete disaster. With the policing, fruitless policing. And they did not have any treatment system almost at all.
Mm-hmm.
And so they did several things. First of all, they tore down those buildings and those areas that were slum,
Mm-hmm.
and built new buildings and gave people a chance to live other places. And they built a treatment system, a nationwide treatment system for all types of addiction treatment. And they built a low threshold methadone available everywhere by bus, actually, by methadone buses in Lisbon. And they also established this referral courts, where the police, instead of imprisoning people, they could refer people to an advisory committee, where they had chance to either sort of convince that they were not in need of help, or they had to take help. So in these advisory committees, people cannot refuse help if they need it, but they can convince the magistrate or the psychologist, the social worker, that they can manage without. And so if it's a minor drug problem, sort of more or less taking cannabis for some pleasure or something, they would get a sort of educational lecture about cannabis, but they would not get any fines and all this type of thing.
It's interesting. You notice.
But I just sort of would like to emphasize that Lisbon is more or less so pictured as that the decriminalization of drug use were the solution. It was a minor part of a large social change, and was not completely decriminalization either, because they were still taken by the police if they using drugs in open areas, but then sent to these advisory committees if people did not suspect drug peddling. If they were drug peddlers, they would still be arrested and taken to court.
So the penalty, the sanction, was still available to use in case of to deal with nuisance crime.
Yeah.
On your very helpful chart on Lisbon, and you just noted it there, that you also have a category called Reconstruction Projects.
Yeah, that's what I thought about it. These areas that was earlier called the colonies or something. The supermarkets was sort of called the supermarkets, where people were living in devastating conditions, and where the means of existence were sort of more or less hopeless, and the buildings were very bad condition. And these areas, which was actually areas which earlier were occupied by the Portuguese army soldiers and their families, this was taken down and rebuilt, reconstructed.
So this happened in not just in Lisbon, it also happened in Vienna and Amsterdam as well.
In Amsterdam, particularly. In Vienna, I can't remember that so much, because Vienna has had a very long tradition of public housing and public responsibility. And so I don't think they did have these areas that was deconstructed. But they instead they built a very strong treatment system, built very much upon low threshold methadone and also low threshold morphine, together with the outreach social services in cooperation with the police.
Mm-hmm. And in Amsterdam, I had an opportunity to visit Amsterdam and meet with the head of drug policy there, and tour the shelters and tour the region. And they also noted that they rebuilt, we call it redevelopment in California.
That was in Amsterdam, they did that, yes, absolutely.
In what was called the Zijik area.
Mm.
That's very similar to the Tenderloin and to Skid Row in San Francisco and Los Angeles. These are very poor neighborhoods that some people believe should be redeveloped. Let's move on to the question of safe injection sites.
Yeah.
There seems like what is the difference between, I believe you call it health rooms, user rooms, and then
Health room was the health rooms was called, this is the term used in some of the cities, but actually it's rooms where people can come and inject and come in contact with social services and also medical services, because there are quite a lot of problems, health problems, social problems. So these are sort of not only places to come to inject, but also places to discuss and get your help. Yeah. And when some call them injection rooms, some call them health rooms. But it's the same thing.
It's the same thing.
But they didn't have that in Portugal. They didn't have it.
Uh-huh. How is that different from heroin-assisted treatment?
The heroin-assisted treatment is at that time we had only in Switzerland and in Netherlands, Holland. There's since then also been built in Germany, some places in Germany, and also in Denmark and some other places. But the difference is that in the Heroin project, you are accepted as a patient, where you get the heroin for free, where you get it to inject at the site twice or 3 times a day, and they often get also methadone to the night to keep them through the night, and they have to come to these heroin treatment systems 7 days a week without any sort of without any goal of stopping. So this is, in my opinion, it's a sort of very expensive and perhaps not especially effective way of helping people, because you can only help those who are able to come 7 days a week, day after day. And this means that you should not have too large physical disabilities. You should not have too large psychiatric disabilities. You should not be too unruly. And you have to sort of be able to comply with the regulations. And most of those people, quite a high percentage of those patients can be helped with adjusted methadone systems, in my opinion. Perhaps, yeah.
So
but it's just a sort of intensified system where you get the heroin for free, but you have to come 3 times a day, day out and day in.
When I asked the head of drug policy in the Netherlands how many people they had on the heroin-assisted program, and they said fewer than 50.
That is what my judgment is, that it's a relatively few people that seem to adjust to these programs, and perhaps you can help those people with cheaper in other ways, with other approaches. I'm not against it. I'm just in doubt that it's a good choice.
And how should we think about, there's been so much discussion and research on methadone over the years. Is there a single approach to methadone, or is it the case that some people, is it okay for some people to be on methadone, say, their entire lives? Or is it important for people to try to eventually taper off of methadone? And I believe there's a new version of it. Is it buprenorphine?
Buprenorphine, yes. Buprenorphine, yes.
Can you just tell me a little bit about what is the current thinking? How do you think about?
When all this, when we started studying the methadone, the literature of methadone, yeah, it was one striking feature that it does not cure dependency. It sort of hides or is much like a diabetic. The insulin do not cure the diabetic, but you don't get ill as long as you get the insulin. So it's a sort of a way of living with changes in your nervous system, because and that means also that you are just as neuroadaptive, your neural system is just as changed when you start, if you try to stop the methadone, as when you start, perhaps even worse. So this means that, in my opinion, you should not start methadone treatment programs without being able to offer the possibility of lifelong treatment. Because there is nothing wrong with living with methadone, but you have to have it. Because if you don't get it, you get ill, you get sick. That does not mean that everybody have to stay all their life. But stopping with taking drugs is usually closely linked to changing or improving your living conditions and your health systems and your health and social, mental and physical health. So if when you're coming with the help of methadone, you're stabilized and you can arrange for a better life and perhaps also take up connection with your families and with other types of social features. So perhaps at that time you might try to stop it if you want it yourself. That's my basic statement, is that nobody should be forced off the methadone or should be expected to taper off if they don't want it self, and if they are not ready for it. Yeah. But on the other hand, if they want it to taper off, they should give every possible help we might get, we might give.
So is it fair to say that your view is that we should not coerce people to taper off of methadone?
No, that's correct. Absolutely. Absolutely. It's inhuman and ineffective.
So it is important. We do need to use some coercion to break up the open drug scenes.
Yes.
Because we're dealing with problems of public nuisance.
Mm.
But we don't need to use coercion to force people off of methadone.
That's right.
And now what about heroin? Do we need to use coercion to move people from heroin to methadone? Or is your view the same, that it's okay that someone could just use heroin for their whole life and that might be okay?
Well, by principle, there is no clear difference between heroin and methadone. But heroin is very much more effective, and you have to take it 3 times a day. And it's not registered as a medical drug. So as long as it's not registered as a medical drug, it's illegal to take it. And it's connected to criminality and different types of policing and different types of this. And you cannot sort of live with daily intake of heroin without having heroin for free. And then you have to establish heroin centers and to have centers where people get heroin 3 times a day, day out and day in. I can't really see that is a feasible policy.
Right.
So, but it's feasible to have them take methadone once a day, and when they are stable, they might even have fetch the methadone once a week. If you take buprenorphine, we have this Buvidal, which is now a new buprenorphine type, which is depot injections. So you can have one injection of Buvidal once a week or once a month.
Wow.
And that's much more practical and give people freedom.
Mm-hmm. I want to talk more about how the consensus was reached in these cities. Can you say more about what exactly happened? Is this something that, so there was sort of a back and forth, the people in these cities, they elect a conservative party, they crack down, but it doesn't really work. They elect a liberal party, they are empathetic and helpful, but that doesn't really work. Was there something, but how does it work exactly? Did people from two different parties come together? Did the newspaper editorial writers write articles about this? Were there NGOs that advocated for this? Did you?
That was different in the different cities, but the common feature were a sort of a process, a political discussion, political process, where we discussed the experiences and set down project groups and reform groups, and they sort of reached a joint agreements, because it's not there is no deep-seated difference between a political left-wing or political conservative party. They have some basic differences of political opinion, but they do in reality try to find solutions for problems. And if in a due political process, you can have interactions and discussions and evaluations of experiences, you might reach an agreement simply by the process of reasonable reasoning. I think that's the answer.
So you'd have, it sounds like what you're saying is that you would have people from both parties. Let's just pretend there's only, in the United States, we only have two parties, but the idea would be that
United States, you have to have only two parties and they cannot talk together. But
yeah,
that's your problem.
And in California, it's dominated by the Democratic Party, but they tend to have two wings, one that's more conservative and one that's more liberal. But the idea is there would be some people that would be meeting in private with experts over some period of time, months, years, to get some agreement on a common strategy. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. More or less right. It might in different ways, but in California perhaps in that way. But I would sort of, my experience have been that if people are given the chances to study the facts and the evaluated experiences, they tend to understand that there is only a way of compromising, a way of joining forces, and a way of understanding that people are sick, people need help, but they also have to understand that people cannot live on the streets, and they also have to understand that there is no way of punishing people that helps people being less sick or less hopeless. So we have to join forces. Yeah.
And where did you see is the leadership for that coming from politicians? Is it coming from psychiatrists like yourself? Where is it coming from? Where's the leadership coming from to make that happen? Is it coming from the mayor's office?
In all these cities, it came from the city hall, from the political parties and the political discussions, and they did need to have the mayor's office involved. Yes, I think so, but it doesn't mean that they cannot use psychiatrists and other professions to enlighten the process and giving suggestions and sort of evaluating different possibilities and so on.
Has anybody from a United States city ever reached out to you to get your advice on what to do about our open drug scenes?
No, we have not had any questions from the United States, no. We have been discussing in Britain, and we also have had meetings with other European parties, and we have had a delegation from Brazil, and a delegation from Turkey, and we had also had some meetings with some people from South Africa, but none from the United States.
So in California, and our big open drug scenes are in San Francisco and Los Angeles, but actually they've spread to other cities. Nobody even calls them open drug scenes or open drug markets. What they call them are homeless encampments. And I'm curious, in Europe, did people refer to these as open drug scenes, or did they refer to them as homeless?
It depends upon in what way, what connection you're talking about them. The problem is referred to as open drug scenes or drug-infected areas or drug markets or devastated drug-using quarters and so on. But the homelessness is often is seen far beyond the drug-using population. But you cannot help. You have to offer some possibilities of living quarters and so on, also for the drug users. So this is intensely involved as a necessary ingredient in the necessary measures. Yeah.
So in other words, you have to have shelter.
Shelter is perhaps the first element. They would like for example, in Vienna, they had a very impressive system of municipal small apartments. Because there is a long tradition of that people in Vienna should have the right to have a living quarter. But this is also in Switzerland, everywhere. It's sort of a basic phenomenon that people must have a right to have a place to live, and shelter is just a short-term solution for a necessity, but it's not a solution.
One of the questions on shelter is, it seems as though there's some evidence that suggests that if there's too much services provided in a single area, it contributes to the concentration and the open air drug scene. And it seems as though the literature, including your research, suggests that the services and the shelters should be diffused more than concentrated. Am I reading you correctly on that?
Well, the question of concentration and dispersion is not. This is not. This is more the. Some people take the stand that it's better to have people concentrated because then we can survey them. Then we do know where we have them. So we better control if they are concentrated. While the other opposite statement is that if you don't disperse it, you lose the sort of you cannot sort of help people on the concentrated concentrated scenes, because then you sort of get lost in all the drug taking. So help people, you have to have them dispersed. But the other thing you say is that the helping measures should not be concentrated on the scenes. You should not have all the helping measures for difficult persons concentrated in small areas in the cities, because then you have all the people with large problems concentrated in the same areas, which again makes it difficult to handle the situation or to master the situation. So that is just we had in Oslo at that time when we had a relatively large open drug scene at the railway station. Then there was some sort of radical theater groups that would come down and play theater for them to sort of help them. We had also outreach social workers, and we also had all this type of helping measures. Well, I also had in Zurich methadone buses, condom deliverance, different types of but then if the drug scenes also or the concentrated areas also have all the possibilities for help, then people come to these areas again, which is counterproductive. So you have to disperse the helping measures and also try to disperse the living quarters.
Mm-hmm.
In Oslo, it's a policy now trying to have. They will also have 21 city parks, and its policy is that each city parks should have helping measures for its own inhabitants, but should try not to concentrate in downtown Oslo. This is not Well, they're trying to do this, but it's a policy, but it's not quite successful actually.
And
So we have
you said 21. I'm sorry, 21 city parks.
city municipalities, city organizations. So the city is sort of divided in administrative city parts.
So 21. There's 21 parts of Oslo.
Yeah.
And each is expected to have its own services so that we don't you don't concentrate and create open drug scenes in the downtown of Oslo. Is that
We
right?
try to prevent that, but it's only partly successful. Yeah.
So can you say more about that? Why is, in other words, it's still concentrating, even in Oslo?
Absolutely, yes. Well, for one, there are several problems here. One problem is that if you have an ongoing political controversy, sometime after a while, the agreement will tend to go away. And so they have the same again, the liberals scolding the police and the conservatives putting on strengthening the policing. So we have had, it was sort of the past sort of came back. And that is also what they said in Zurich and all the cities. This is not a problem you solve. This is a problem you live with, but you have to live with it in constructive ways. Because the drugs are in the city, and there are people that congregate in the city centers. There are people that have psychiatric problems, have mental problems, have living problems, and they tend to go down to the city. This is a sort of dynamic problem which do not go away. So we have to have a long-term strategy and to adjust to the problem in the way it develops. At present, we have the health room, the drug taking room, the largest shelter, and several other low threshold helping services concentrated in the central area, which means that they also have drug users in the same areas. And when the police get too much scolded by the papers, the police gets tired, so they retract, and so the problems grows again. So this is sort of dynamic thing, but one problem is that we should not concentrate the helping services for the most problematic people in the center of the city.
And you say the newspapers scold the police. You're saying they scold the police for being too strict, too hard?
They sort of they make what do you call it, when they write about there are some interviews and some pictures of poor addicts who are sort of harassed by the police, and they sort of so they make sort of stories about how hopeless the police are.
So in other words, even after you get this consensus, even in cities where you have a consensus and you have success in breaking up the open air drug scenes, there's sometimes the liberal parties will say the police are being too harsh and they shouldn't be so harsh, and then the police withdraw and then the problem gets worse.
Yeah.
And then does it also work on the other side that conservatives say it's not harsh enough?
Yes, absolutely.
So in your philosophy and your view, because you've studied this for now many years, many decades, is to say, yeah, that's part of the dynamic, that there's some back and forth, but you want to try to get both sides to embrace the consensus of both.
Yes.
In the United States, we use this expression carrots and sticks.
Yeah.
Do you say something similar to that? And did you hear that language in other cities? Is that similar language in European cities?
Carrot and sticks is a sort of well-known metaphor.
You said helping. You said also helping policies and law enforcement. Is that the other way you talk about it?
Okay, so you mean if you say carrots, it's a sort of making people go after the carrot in the future, but you have to make people help people where they are, and show them where to go, not having a carrot where they can go to find it because will not, they're often not able to do it. And the sticks metaphor is not either very good because people are not going around hitting people.
Yeah.
So
So you prefer the
basically, it's a sort of a restrictive. We have to have limits, and you have to have sort of forces that say this is not good enough. You have to take some measures there. And I think that to some extent you might use these social orders, these social disturbances orders, saying that well now your problems are makes so much nuisance that you are not allowed to stay in this area for a while. So this type of thing might also be necessary.
It seems language is very important, and using the right language is important. And I think you're right about carrots and sticks. And so it sounds like I hear you use the word helping policies. That seems very, very simple, straightforward. So on the one hand, you have helping policies. What is the other one? Is it what is the better word for sticks? Is it law enforcement? Is it
We
strict?
might say law enforcement, or we might say restrictions, restrictive policies. Yeah.
So restrictive policies,
Yes.
helping policies.
Yeah. Yes. But basically, I think one of the main things is that you have got to have a harm reduction approach, but not a harm. So reducing harms is good by itself, but it's not necessary. It's not sufficient because you cannot reduce the harms if the harms grow, in spite of what you try. But you have to have low threshold services that reduce the harms, both to the yeah.
What does low threshold service mean?
Low threshold services means that it's a service that are available without applications, without running down doorsteps, without limitations. It's a sort of helping services where you are.
I see. You don't have to. You just get it. You don't have to.
You don't have to have insurances. You don't have to have employees paying for you, and you don't have to apply for it. You don't have to go to the social services and get the reference. Yeah, it's everything.
I have a couple more questions, and then I'll let you go. I know it's getting late there. The first question is on mental illness. There is some evidence. The data is very unreliable, but basically there's some evidence that somewhere between 25 to 75% of the people in the open drug scenes in California are suffering severe mental illness, schizophrenia, severe bipolar disorder. And we have a long history here where we emptied our mental institutions, our mental hospitals. And we don't have universal government provided health care, although we do often have health care for poor people and people with mental illness. What was the approach towards dealing with people with mental illness by these 5 cities that broke up open air drug scenes, and also by Oslo?
Well, all these cities have public health systems that offer psychiatric help to people who need it. We did also have some problem with downbuilding of the asylums, as you had in United States. But then this has been coupled with the responsibility for the local communities to have available living quarters, and also economic support, and also treatment. So it's regarded as an extremely poor policy to let the schizophrenics stay succumb in the city centers. So with the compulsory treatment is built down, but the ambulatory helping services and the voluntary helping services built up. So in Oslo, I'm working in a low threshold services, also once a week. And in this low threshold services, we also have low threshold mental health services. So we cooperate on an individual basis around those with schizophrenia. So and the aim is to have them get their own apartments in their own housing conditions, and they of course some day centers and different types of services. So it's yeah.
One of the things that mental health and mental illness advocates say is that there needs to be there's very little awareness among many people with severe mental illness that they suffer from severe mental illness. I think they call it low insight, and that some amount of involuntary hospitalization is required for people suffering severe mental illness. And I'm curious, does Norway and these other cities, do they have involuntary hospitalization of people with severe mental illness, or is it also very difficult to involuntarily hospitalize somebody? Because obviously it's a very serious thing to involuntarily hospitalize a family member. On the other hand, I have not found a single psychiatrist who thinks that the best way to treat schizophrenia is with heroin and methamphetamine. And that seems to be what many severely mentally ill people are using. So I'm curious your view of this question of voluntary versus involuntary hospitalization of the severely mentally ill.
The problem of the question of voluntary versus involuntary hospitalizations should be sort of seen with outside the question of addiction, because the involuntariness, we of course have involuntary hospitalizations also in Norway, which is sometimes criticized, mostly short term actually, but also some long term placement and also some long-term involuntary depot medications. So even if they are let out of the hospital, they have to go to the ambulatory and take the drugs and so on. This is difficulty by itself. In the drug scenes, it seems that it's the combination of addiction treatment and voluntary or involuntary treatment is necessary, also involuntary. Because the problem is to let people sort of succumb or sort of getting worse, and sometimes also taking their lives or taking others' lives, should not be let go on. So we are using now, I think, some parts of the New Hampshire model actually, when they built up this outreach services. And also this is also built out in the Netherlands and also in Britain, to have a fact team or outreach teams that connect to each. They have a small number of patients which they connect to and sort of serve individually.
Mm-hmm.
And where they also the social services and the medical services sort of combined. And that seems to function quite relatively well. Still, we have schizophrenics in poor condition downtown Oslo, but there are not very many.
And do you, are there, one of the newest phenomena around our open drug scenes is people living in tents, camping tents on the sidewalks. Is that happening also in Europe and Oslo?
Europe, I cannot say. In Britain, London has quite large homelessness problems, which I do not know very much about. I don't think the Switzerland has the same thing, and don't think they have it in Austria. But and certainly not in Frankfurt, Germany. Amsterdam, I don't think so. We don't have any. We have some homeless people living on the streets. But well, there are not very many, and quite a lot of them are people coming from. We have a problem with people coming from other countries, not the asylum seekers or the refugees, and also some people wandering around. Some of them do not have any rights in Norway, so they stay in Norway without having sort of regular rights or services. And some of them are getting quite poor help. So these are some of the unsolved problems. But we don't have problems with people living in tents or people sort of staying on the streets for a long time.
Sorry, just two quick more questions, Dr. Waal. The first is on methamphetamine. While there appears, well, you have methadone and buprenorphine, what do I say, for as treatment of heroin. It appears as though there's not a good alternative to methamphetamine. Can you say what the state of addiction medicine and treatment of methamphetamine is?
Well, the methamphetamine is just one type of amphetamine, which is one type of stimulants. You have to distinguish between opiates, which all types of opiates, where you have this particular dynamics of suppressing the awakeness and the pain and so on, and giving a sort of harmless feeling. And if you don't take it, you get the opposite for quite a long time. The stimulus, it's not the same dynamic. So you can't sort of, it's not a sort of abstinence reaction that you have to can suppress. So presently, it doesn't seem that anybody has found any medication that you can sort of change out, take it instead of methamphetamine. It doesn't work that way, unless of course the people have ADHD, which they have this concentration disorder, where they take Ritalin or take amphetamine, then they can have some use of stimulants. But for people taking methamphetamine or taking cocaine or taking this, it doesn't seem to work that way. Mm-hmm. So there is no solution, medical solution, and this is actually worldwide very, very few drugs that seem to help the amphetamine users.
This is my final question. It seems a little strange, may seem a little strange, but I'm very interested in the work of a psychiatrist who passed away, who was a Holocaust survivor named Viktor Frankl.
Yeah.
You know Viktor Frankl?
Yes.
Did you know him personally?
No, I didn't. No.
The argument of his work is that people need a goal. People need a purpose in life. They need something for which to live. And I'm wondering, do you agree that that's an important element of drug treatment, drug recovery for people? Are these people that often need to get in touch with some purpose for their life? Or is that a little bit too psychological or too flaky? What's your view of the importance of, I guess this gets also to the question of counseling and having a job and reconnecting with family, but how do you think about this issue of people needing to have a reason to live and a purpose to live, and that maybe the drug using has been a substitute for having that?
Obviously, people with drug problems, addiction problems, people with difficult upbringing and sort of dysharmonic lifestyles and problematic life development processes are overrepresented by drug addicts. in groups of drug addicts. And to have a feeling of meaning of life is closely connected to your upbringing status and your sort of your families and your sort of experiences of good things in life. Personally, I think that having the sense of meaning, of feeling that something is valuable, something not so valuable, that is an important element for all of us, also for the addicts. And if you can in the helping process, help assist the person to develop or discover his own aspirations, you certainly do him a good favor. And certainly if I do so, but there has been so many attempts to either to give the addicts Jesus or give the addicts Marx or some revolutionary goal or some other types of the Buddhist or Zen or something, and it's oversold. It's only valuable if it is develops from the person's own life experiences. So it's not in no way a cure-all. But if an addict do find a way that is experienced as meaningful and relations that is meaningful, of course that is a very, very important element in changing his situation.
But it has to come from internal.
Pardon?
It has to come from the person, inside the person. Can't be imposed on them.
It has to develop from, of course, you might inspire, some people might inspire others. But it has to sort of grow out of some sort of brain or some sort of thing from a person's own life.
You mentioned,
yeah.
You mentioned that Jesus, Marx, and Zen are oversold.
Yes.
What's undersold in your view? What do we not pay enough attention to? You must have seen a lot of fads and trends over the decades. So I'm curious, is there something that you feel like we've been...
In the helping business or in the fitness business, what seems to stand the test of time is the relationships, is the empathy between the treater and the treated. There has to be some sort of reciprocity. It's important. Yeah. I think that is that's one thing that stands out in all the fitness research.
Relationships with anybody, I take it, with your counselor or with your family, or your employer.
Yeah.
And is it fair to say that there's also, it's a sense of feeling responsibility for something beyond yourself?
Yeah. Well, yes. Yeah. Well, yeah. If you, that is when the people feel able to take responsibility, they grow. And growth is one of the core elements of change.
Well, Dr. Waal, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me. This is really illuminating, and I'm going to share the video with others and share your paper, which I think is a seminal paper, a very important paper that people are not aware of here. So thank you for your time. Is there a question you wish I would have asked, or something you wish something you wanted to say that you didn't get a chance to say?
I think you have done wonderfully. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, sir. I hope that we have a chance to meet in person someday. I appreciate your life.
Same, fine.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.